we think that businessmen and farmers don't get
to talk to one farmer, and I know what it is to talk to 21,000 farmers. And it takes about 7/10 of my time to talk to farmers from Mexico to the edge of Mexico up to the Pacific Northwest and all over these states where grain products are raised in surplus. Now, I want to get right down to business with you because you're here for business reasons. We have trouble on the farm front. We have lots of trouble on the farm front. We're having the most unusual experience on the farm front that's been my experience in the 30 years that I've been going to Washington, from the days of President Harding up till just the other day, and I'm flying there again day after tomorrow. I'll fly back to St. Paul tomorrow, and the next morning at 7:30 I expect to board a plane for Washington, and expect a very interesting evening with a group of senators and representatives who have invited me to come in there and spend a non-publicized, off-the-record meeting with about 30 key senators and House members and about 20 important men who are the head of industry in the United States to talk about what's happening on the farm front. And that ought to be encouraging to you, that at last there are some big business people that are beginning to feel this pinch and want to know where we're going and why we're going and when we're going to stop going there and go in the place we want to go. And if I have my way about it, I'm going to persuade them to take a little walk up Parity Hill and get back on the ball again. Now, I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican. I left that for my father and mother. My mother was a Democrat, my father was a Republican, and they seemed to have that pretty well settled before I was born, because I don't remember any trouble about politics until 1896. And for the few of us who are left, who know something about 1896, you'll recall that it wasn't the farm problem. They were running for office about it all. Mr. Bryan insisted that our currency be backed by silver, and his opponent insisted it be backed by gold. So we had an election about it. Now we don't think much of the value of silver. We got the gold buried in Kentucky, and we got something else to talk about. We'll probably end up with a great crusade. We were told we were going to have one, and I'm waiting for it to start any day now. I want to watch it. But in 1896, it came very forcibly to my mind that politics was an unusual thing, because my father, who was a farmer, was standing on Main Street in the little town of Valparaiso, Indiana, where I was born and raised, and his neighbor, a Democrat, met him on the street. My father's name was Sam, and his neighbor's name was Al. It was Al Brown, and my father's Sam Thatcher. And I was with my father. He was leading me down the street, and they stopped. Hello, Al. Hello, Sam. How are things? First thing you know, they got into a debate about that campaign of 1896. And hard money and soft money. And finally, the Democrat, old Al Brown, with a long red sandy beard, he said, "By gosh, Sam, do you mean to tell me if the United States government stamps that dollar, it ain't worth $1? My father says to him, this was a great debate, you see. He said, "You poor old fool." He said, "Do you think if the United States government stamped your whiskers hay, the cow would eat it?" So, ever since then, I've listened to these debates, and they often remind me of Al Brown's whiskers and hay. So when I speak to you tonight I'm not interested in Democrats, and I'm not interested in Republicans, and I'm not interested in socialists, and I don't know communists. I never associated with them, although being charged with it, I wouldn't know one if I saw one. There may be one here. If he is, we'll have him thrown out. So if anybody here's a communist, stand up and we'll throw you out. Fair enough? Get rid of it. So when I talk as a member of the Farmers Union. I talk as one of you who ships grain to the Farmers Union GTA. I'm the only fellow who has a farm that raises wheat and who also manages Farmers Union GTA. A great institution. You asked me, Mr. Mayor, if I believed in big business. And I said, we are big business. Farmers Union GTA, which started 15 years ago yesterday morning, does a business $1 million a day, and that isn't hay. That's big business. And we get a very fine business out of South Dakota, which helps make the institution big. And we have no better directors than the 11 farmers who serve on that great board of directors than Mr. Dahmy and Mr. Lorix, who sit on the platform. But getting to the subject that I want to discuss tonight, I did not get excited about this present administration until after Secretary Benson made his farm speech in St. Paul along the latter part of February. I was just laying low, waiting for the crusade to start. I had been working down through the years during the administrations, the tail end of the Harding administration, the Coolidge administration, the Hoover administration, and I got to know those men and meet with them and talk with them, all the way up to our very fine president today, President Eisenhower, with whom I visited before the election at his home in New York, and also a couple of months ago visited with him in the White House about the same subjects that I talked to him about up in New York. I wouldn't say that he had changed his mind, but he seemed worried. I have talked with, of course, a great many members of the House and a great many members of the Senate down through the years. I lived there for years, lobbying for agriculture. I have not only some understanding about how the Congress works, how laws are made and what they mean, but I have a very deep concern about how farmers may protect themselves in this legislated economy. My first blood pressure came on me since the war in 1948. When somebody wasn't satisfied with the farm programs we had and wanted to make a change. Now, any of you, like myself, who have reared children and watched them from that first day up till they go through high school and into college, and you've done your best about it and tried to help them and make something out of them, you'd get a little sore if somebody come around and said to you, well, whose brat's that? Don't you know how to raise a kid? What's wrong with your parents? Well, I spent every minute of the time that was devoted from April 1st, 1932, all the way through the formative years of your agricultural programs. I sat in on every conference in 1932 which dealt with the troubles of the Depression and the kind of a program that we would asked the next President of the United States to support. I participated in writing that program. And every so-called farm leader in this country who had a national position signed that document, including the Farmers Union, including the Farm Bureau, including the Grange, including the great cooperatives. We were as a unit, and because we were as a unit, the governor of New York, Governor Roosevelt, said as soon as the inauguration is completed, I will call a special session of the Congress and ask the Congress to pass the legislation that you've all agreed on. Now, we all agreed on it, every one of us. We had complete unity. And he did call a special session. And the Agricultural Adjustment Act, that great instrument, that great document, the Magna Carta for American farmers, the first time they had legislative consideration of any consequence since the formation of the United States government out of the colonies. All through that period, for 150 years, tariffs had been written, all sorts of laws had been written, land had been given away to the railroads, give away, give away, give away, help, 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 to build everything up, and agriculture just was left like an orphan to hunt for itself and kept going west and getting new land all the time. Finally, we got the showdown because Mr. Coolidge vetoed our program twice in the 20s, and then Mr. Hoover had another idea and gave us the Federal Farm Board, the Marketing Act, and I worked with that all the way through, did everything I could to make it work, and it did have some value, but it wasn't enough. You all know what happened. And then we came into 33, and based on the program we had outlined, all of us, unanimous, agriculture was unanimous, we finally got that great piece of legislation, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which had to do with our farming and our prices. And we thought we were on our way with a processing tax, and we'd be able to move our surpluses and keep our prices up in the marketplace and not bother the federal government about any support programs or anything of the sort. We were on our way with an internal tax to pay our way. And the United States Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional. And then we were back. We were back to A again. And then we involved the support prices, the loan programs, and the farm storage programs, and all these things that you've learned about, and these things that have been helpful to you. But before we did that, because farmers were busted all over this country, I sat in with the committee that prepared the budget outline of the then Resettlement Administration to keep people alive on these states, in these states where low prices and drought had rendered them into a position of poverty. And I remember those days very well because I was coming out in this area from Washington and making some meetings. And 40% of all the farmers in this state were receiving at one time grants, gifts from the federal government under the administration of the Resettlement Administration. Do any of you remember that? Anybody hear of a grant? Do you remember what a hopeless looking situation it was during the drought? Do you remember those days? Huh? And you remember the cry of those days? That first appropriation we had for the Resettlement Administration, as I remember, was $515 million. And the old reactionary said, you will bust the Treasury. You will break the government. Well, it would be better to break the government than to have 40% of the farm families of these Great Plains states starve to death. Because a government is of no value unless it looks after the welfare of the great masses of the people. And the greatest place we have to serve humanity is on the land of the farmers who raise the food and fiber without which we'd all die in a few weeks. Now, I lived through those years, and it was slow work building it up. And just like these mothers took care of those babies, we watched every move. We were as cautious and careful as we could be. We tried to have good administration. We brought it down to the state level. We brought it to the county level. We had farmers serving on committees. we were doing everything decent and fair we knew to do. And I never felt once during that period of time any creeping socialism run up my legs and back. I never had the feeling of creeping socialism once. Nor did I feel when we were handing out $25, $30, $35, and $40 a month to farm families, not only here, but in New Hampshire. Think of that. And Vermont. Why, it even reached those intelligent people. All over the United States. We had this program to save our farmers. Why, they even had WPA in New Hampshire and Vermont and the Carolinas, and even in Texas. And in those days, they were all scrapping to get an auditorium built. I never heard anybody worry about subsidies. They were seeing who could get the most. Well, it was a matter of employing people and paying them a little something that without which we could have had revolution in this country and communism. If you want to beat communism in this country, be sure you have prosperity on the farms and in the factory, and you'll never have communism. Now, I carry around what I call my inspiration. You couldn't buy that for $5,000. It isn't worth a nickel to anybody but me. That's 4 canceled checks that were issued in South Dakota. 4 checks that were issued in South Dakota. They were issued by the Stickney Cooperative Union. Where is Stickney? It's right back of this building. Sounded like parody. Well, here are 4 checks that our field man and friend Ernie Hams was good enough to get a hold of for me. And these checks were issued at Stickney, South Dakota by that farmers cooperative elevator to some farmers that had some grain to sell. And I understand why they had to have help. Because in the time that these checks were issued in 1932, they were enjoying to the fullest. They were receiving the fulfillment of the free enterprise system. It was so free. I want to tell you, if you have any doubts about the efficacy and the soundness of free enterprise, brother, come with me. I'll show you free enterprise at its best. You know, free. Just like you get, I better skip that. Every once in a while I'm tempted to say something you'd understand, but some of you might not like it. So I'll try to keep it up on the platform.
Well, anyway, here are some farmers that were enjoying the fulfillment of the free enterprise. Now, this was in an era when we didn't have any creeping socialism. This was the day when you weren't regimented. You remember you weren't regimented in 32? Nobody was regimented. Nobody knew what to do. Well, in those good old days, you know, the kind that Secretary Benson's talking about, where you have your complete independence, and you're a complete American, and you aren't working for government bounty, you know, free. Well, these fellas almost made it. This fella sold his wheat. He got within 15 cents of being free. They paid him 15 cents a bushel for his wheat. The fellow rye, he did a little better. He got within 13 cents of freedom. He got 13 cents for his rye. And the barley fellow, he was a little better off. He was only 10 cents away from freedom. He got 10 cents a bushel. Everything for free. But the fellow that took the cake was the guy with the oats, and he got 9 cents. And I think he's a master farmer, if I remember right. Whenever you read in the paper about getting your money in the marketplace, when you read about the free enterprise system, it is not practiced by the people who tell you it's right. The railroads talk about getting back our birth, our rebirth of Americanism and our free enterprise system, the thing that makes us great. Well, the railroads have had their support prices increased 12 times since the last war. They've had their support prices increased 12 times since the last war. Now that's a pretty good gate. 12 times is pretty good. Of course, there are all the fellows that had it, you couldn't expect them to go much faster than that. But 12 times is pretty good. How many people have their support prices raised since the war? Huh? What way you put this guy? Because right now I want to get right into what I want to talk to you about. Now I make these statements, and if there are some lay economists in the audience that want to take this up, I would love them to Thank you.